Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Heather Ogden. I am the training coordinator for NCAAR. Thanks for coming to our Let's Talk About webinar series today. So today's webinar is to create awareness of today, which is our third National Fentanyl Awareness Day. Last year, over 70,000 Americans fatally overdosed on illegally made fentanyl. And fentanyl is now found in fake pills and a lot of the illicit substances that people are purchasing on the street. A lot of times, though, people are not even aware that they are in these substances. A lot of people hear fentanyl and they think immediately of just heroin and opiates in general. So unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are buying substances on the street or acquiring them from friends, and they have no idea that fentanyl is in any of these substances. Because of this, it's an urgent public health crisis. We have been trying to solve it in a number of ways that have failed miserably. We are trying to solve it in ways that are turning out to be much more successful. So today we're going to talk about some of the ways that we are now approaching fentanyl awareness. And we all have a role to play in preventing further losses and further tragedies. NCAAR and our panelists participating today share a common belief that prevention includes recognizing how social determinants of health affect the wellness of families and individuals. Education and support that includes communication skills to better understand underlying issues is harm reduction and will save lives. We are going to talk a little bit today about what people know about fentanyl and a lot about what people don't know about fentanyl. There's a lot of myths surrounding fentanyl. We'll talk about them today as well and try and put some of that to rest so there's more education, and our participants today, both our panelists and our viewers, can let people know what is actually going on out there. We will be having a short screening of counterfeit pills you need to know, and then we will be talking with our panelists. Our panelists today are our own Tanya Ahern from NCAAR, Denise Mariano, who is Vice President in Partnerships and Song for Charlie, Rebecca Alfaro, Deputy Executive Director on the former JCATA, but now is known as the Governor's Council on Substance Use Disorder, Angela Valenta, Executive Director of Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey, and Fred Muench, who is the founder of Clear 30 and the past president of the Partnership to End Addiction. If you have questions for our panelists, you can post them in Q&A. Again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our tech support, Ryan and Summer, who are going to show you our formal screening of counterfeit pills you need to know.
Hold on 1 minute while we get the video started. Sorry about that.
Denise told me she would sing while we're waiting for the video. She'd entertain anybody.
I don't know. I think the way that landed is that you were going to sing. I don't know.
It was 4-part harmony. I don't know what you're talking about. Denise, you have to start us off.
Not happening. I could start off in another area, but are you good, Tanya? This could be my fault too for not sending you a direct link.
No, it's okay.
Great.
Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Medical Watch is sponsored by UChicago Medicine, bringing expert primary and urgent care close to home with locations throughout Chicagoland. Schedule online at uchicagomedicine.org.
Message from doctors. Earlier in the newscast, Lourdes Duarte told us about nitazines, the newest drug to hit the streets.
Medical reporter Dina Baer has that warning.
Wait, this seems to be the wrong link.
Yes. Yeah.
Stop this one, Brian. I'm sorry. Apologize.
Nitazines are a class. Sorry, guys.
There you go.
You've heard about pills killing young people, right? A teenager takes what they thought was a prescription pill and never wakes up. We're not talking about a drug overdose, accidental or otherwise. We're talking about being fatally poisoned by a single pill, one that looks like a legit Xanax or Percocet or Oxycontin. Except these pills aren't legit. They're counterfeit, fake. They can kill you within minutes. And it's happening all around you. The fastest growing group of victims is young and inexperienced. They take pills for different reasons. Some of them are experimenting, others are stressed out and self-medicating. Many victims died at home in their beds after swallowing just one pill. Every young person is at risk. So what's going on? We live in a quick fix. There's no standard amount of fentanyl in these can kill.
Since fentanyl kills about 136.
Sorry, we seem to have a technical
Some of our
difficulty.
technical issues here. I know that some people lost audio in the middle of that.
So I'd be happy to recap for 30 seconds, right? So,
Yeah.
so a couple things. We created that at Song for Charlie for a few reasons. Yes, the counterfeit pills, which we're seeing in the news every day, thank God, right? Because it's a new drug landscape. But what we're also talking about there, it's not just unintentional with those younger, that Gen Z group, going out into social media, but we have to also think about, let's just talk about this time of the year. It's spring break, it's graduation, right? And we have, these 16, 17-year-olds just wanting to have fun. And maybe it starts with a few beers or a few drinks and like, hey, isn't it a great idea to, try cocaine for the first time? Again, unintentional, but we're not talking about that group enough, right? These teenage risk takers. And then, of course, because we want to close that divide and not just say, poisoning and overdose, which to me often feels like guilty versus innocent, we want to talk about the people that are, have substance use disorder, right? And sometimes that's unintentional. Sometimes it's not. But again, we try to bring in all audience. It's not just about counterfeit pills. Is that the crux of this film? Yes, because that's who we're trying to reach, the young people and parents. But Tanya, we could certainly include the video in the follow-up, email too.
Yeah, we'll definitely send the video. And if we have time at the end, I can try to show it again. I'll go on the link and try to get it from here.
All right. Thank you for the recap, Denise.
Yep.
Sure that was helpful for those that lost audio and also helpful for people that
Yeah.
were filtering in because, we always forget those 12 o'clock webinars like, oh, I got to jump on.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and we'll start with you, Denise, since you
Sure.
kicked us off. So tell us a little bit about Song for Charlie. I know that the founders, Ed and Mary Turnin, they created Song for Charlie after they lost their son, Charlie.
Mhm.
So they have a mission to create more awareness about fentanyl, especially in counterfeit prescription pills. So how did this evolve from one pill can kill to what you guys call the new drug talk? Can you talk
Sure.
a little bit about that?
So like any other family, whether it's substance use disorder or a drug-induced, death, these accidental deaths, I always come back to this quote, like, we don't know what we don't know. And here's just yet another family not knowing. If you hear their story, Charlie was a typical college guy and he didn't know, but guess what? Mom and dad didn't know, right? So, and maybe his college roommates didn't know. And so the awareness piece was, yes, part of making it a public awareness that we're in a national crisis, but what if Charlie's one of his roommates knew, right? Just think of that. We don't know what we don't know. Maybe there would have been Narcan. So I think it turned into awareness so that the other families wouldn't feel that same pain, but knew immediately that we can't just do, and kudos to the one pill can kill, right? We can do stats and we can raise awareness, but we have to educate those out there in the public and families and schools so that we can begin to change the trajectory, right? The more we know, the more knowledge we have. So began doing the education thing. And then this small but mighty team, I think because of the education and because we were serving up facts instead of fiction, because we were not sensationalizing this, this little team gets credibility. And then it was about just, okay, now there's people looking in on us. So the new drug talk started in California. And they just said, we need families on this. And Tanya, this has been a dream of ours forever, right? If we're not bookending this conversation at home with the nurses, with school administrators, sometimes the home is not the proper place, right? They could be part of the problem, but who's that mentor? Is it a coach? Is it anybody? If we're not bookending these conversations at home, we're just not going to be as successful. So that's how we did the new drug talk. I can talk about it more later, but why is it the new drug talk? For multiple reasons. It's the new drug talk because it's not the dare talk. We can no longer use fear tactics, but really come from compassion and education. It's the new drug talk because it is a different landscape. There is no, it's not just substance use disorder. We used to say it could be your kid. Now, we just have to get that message out there. And I can talk a little bit more about that. And why is it the new drug talk? Because we have to create a safe place for our youth, for our children to come and have a conversation, a space that's not punitive. And so what we do is, we said, yes, we're going to give you the tools, but we're also going to help you set that environment, lay it right out in front. There is not going to be punitive damages here. We care about you regardless of what you say, and we want to create that invitation to come back. And so California was the first to recognize and come to us and say, we want a family hub. And I know this is a question later, but it kind of fits now. And then other states would see it. We're launching Oregon today, which is super cool on, National Fentanyl Awareness Day. And then we're involved in a lot of talks with a lot of states. We have Virginia. And now what we did is we took the new drug talk and we created La Nueva, which is not translation. We had an advisory board of experts in the Latino community, and that's being launched today. So it is culturally created, content specifically for that community. We know if we have the conversations, we create that safe place and we educate, we can save lives. That was a long answer.
That's really amazing, though. I was not aware of the new push for the Latina community.
Oh my God. I can't wait to share, and I'll give Tanya a link for that because we're, it's not that we're super proud. We need it. We can't keep on taking, white privileged solutions to a community that it's just not going to work for. So, we've been working on that for about 1.5 years.
Well, it sounds like the Song for Charlie team is really making a lot of progress in some really difficult to enter communities. So we've wanted to work with different communities, especially in this prevention and education piece. Schools are notorious for it's difficult to get into that arena to provide education. So what are some of the barriers that you guys encounter in getting this message out there, and why do you think this message is working so well that it's overcoming some of those barriers?
So I thought about this question, and Tanya knows me, I'm going to flip it. Instead of talking about the barriers, I I'd rather talk about like what we're doing that's working, because it's so low lifting and achievable, and it's not like science. But we partner, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. So we do two things there, right? We don't claim to be the experts. We are not recreating the wheel. Why would we, right? So we're going out there and looking at the best subject matter expertise. Not only does that give us the best information, but guess what? We create new messengers, right? We're part of each other's audience and networks. I think the other thing that we learned, and that I certainly learned, and I'm sure many of you have learned over the years, is, the whole, this is drugs. Let's talk about drugs with your kids. Let's do this. There's that not my kid thing that happens, right? But if we change that messaging, which is still correct, like, yes, are we kind of baiting and switching a little bit? If we serve it up as like the mental health of yours, or the mental health and wellness, let's talk about nutrition, right? Let's get them through the doors and kind of, take many of those spokes in that wheel, and let's have a conversation. If we're going to say, oh my God, fentanyl killing hundreds of kids a day, which is a fact, there's going to be not that kid, right? Without the education that this is the current landscape, it's so much worse than before fentanyl came on the horizon. We're like, my kid would never do that. You can't do that anymore. Your kids are going to experiment. So I think the messaging was really important. I think collaborating and partnering with subject matter expertise, or the best of the best in the field. We don't claim to do anything on mental health, but maybe Child Mind Institute and the JED Foundation, they're the people that get it right, right? I think the other time, is corny or iconic as this sounds, I learned this particularly with Song for Charlie after being at another organization for a long time. It does take a village. And I think what we learned here, maybe because of the crisis, and think of audiences that you never thought before. Yes, we're all thinking of superintendents of schools and so forth, but now we are reeling them in, right? Because it's so personal now, and it's happening to their families. So again, a long-winded, but I wanted to talk, rather than talk about the barriers, just talk about what we can do to partner and collaborate with one another.
Would you say that that's your main win in reaching broader audiences, this collaborative approach?
I think it's that, and I was going to hit this later, but since you asked, I think it's the collaborative approach. And I think it's the vision of the founders of this company, who are humble and never about it's never about us, right? It just I can't even begin to tell you, after working at a larger nonprofit for 13 years, how it fills my heart, but to see how successful it is. And listen, I'll brag here for a minute because it's an example. National Fentanyl Day is Song for Charlie.
Mhm.
We're running this. Most of the country doesn't know that. I would say maybe 1%. We've been working on this for a year. This is our day. It has been for the last 3 years, or the little engine that could behind it. We don't want it branded Song for Charlie. It's not about us, right? And so that we made it a National Fentanyl Awareness Day, to be sure that it's not about us, right? Who cares if we co-brand it? Like, oh, we're the best. It wasn't about that. And because of that, we have 300 events going on today, and people really, kind of joining a movement instead of joining an organization. So I think, being humble and really staying focused and saying, this is what it's about, it's not about us, is not only a huge difference for me personally, but I see the benefits. And the benefits of that is just the partners that we're getting. Sometimes we just have to pinch ourselves, but I think it's the credibility and just where the hearts come from, and having the right mission.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we could all learn a lot from Denise. I know that everybody on this call, we all go back a ways together in different ways, but I think that is one of the things that everybody on this webinar today puts at the center of dealing with this crisis, is that all take a collaborative approach, because we all realize that we have different roles to play, and we just do things better when we do them together.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you for that. I'm gonna turn it over to Rebecca for your portion here. We will get to our general discussion after I pick on each panelist individually. I'll try and be nice. So, Rebecca, you're with the Governor's Council, and I know you guys do a lot of what is termed prevention work.
Yes.
So Denise just told us a lot about the initiative that Song for Charlie has rolling out into schools. What are some of the prevention strategies that you guys would recommend to parents to address fentanyl and the fentanyl crisis?
I think, parents, it's tough because, there's a lot of conversations that parents don't want to have or they're not comfortable with because they don't have the information and the knowledge that they need. And so, talking early, talking now, and talking often, I think are the things that need to happen with parents. And there's so many opportunities for this to happen in the car, driving to sports, in the house while we're taking medication. One of the things that I've always talked to my kids about early on is they've taken vitamins since they were little. So that's the first and easiest conversation to start having around taking medication responsibly. And, this might look like candy, but it's not candy. We're not going to take extra. We're going to take what's prescribed in the way that it's prescribed and by who it is prescribed by. And so having those conversations, starting them out early so that they really understand that this is not something to be abused or mistaken in any way, is really important. And I think that those conversations can be happening really early. That's something that every parent can do. And then I think there are so many wonderful resources. Angelo from the partnership did a campaign many, many years ago about having dinner together with your family and how that reduces substance use risk by 67%. I know Angelo can talk more about that, but I think these conversations are so important because we start to learn more about our children and we start to see and be able to identify signs and symptoms when things are starting to shift. And I think that that's what's so important is the conversation is important so that your family understands what your familial expectations are. But then also through those conversations, you begin to understand your child better, and you can certainly start to identify when things start to shift a little bit. And so sometimes those shifts are so subtle and we can really intervene early because that's the root of all of this is being able to identify what the root causes are. So when we start to see those shifts happening and being able to identify that early on and getting the help that we need then. So whether it's mental health, assist help, or substance use intervention, we have to be able to catch that early on so we can mitigate those risks. And so those conversations starting are really the root of being able to mitigate, I think, a lot of those risks.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking while you were talking about that, is this link that we often miss, especially as parents. I'm a parent, I'm also a person in recovery, and I've always had this, how do I balance out like normal substance use, like within the community and my own personal experience? When do I start that with my kids? And I had to, just out of necessity, I had to start it very young.
Mm-hmm.
So always had a conversation about the mental health and how if we don't take care of our mental health, how easily it can lead to unhealthier coping mechanisms involving substances sometimes. Like there are other unhealthy mechanisms that we've talked about. But I think that it's helped, like COVID really helped with the mental health conversation. But I think what a lot of people are still missing is that link between mental health and substance use. So thank you for pointing that out, because I think that's a really key part of this conversation, especially when we talk about the prevention space.
Absolutely.
What is the role of community prevention? What is the value in that? Why is it so important to be talking about prevention within our community?
So we just talked about how important it is for parents and individuals, and not just parents, but caregivers. And I know I'm using the term parents, but I really am talking about grown-ups, adults who are caring for children in some capacity. We know that extends to grandparents and extended family members and all of that. So when, I think as responsible adults, who are raising children, in any setting. It is our responsibility to understand and learn more. And that's where the community piece comes in community prevention. Our alliances, our municipal alliances is a program through our office. We have over 300 municipal alliances across the state, and they are responsible for providing community prevention programming in their communities. So it gets as local as it can, where they're really able to intervene and identify what areas of the community need help and identify what evidence-based programs and processes are available to be able to intervene. And so that's where the community prevention piece comes in. Parents don't always know, like I said before, don't always know what to say and how to approach these situations. And that's where the community prevention comes in. They're able to identify programs and opportunities to provide those skills, to provide that skill building for our caregivers, for our family members, for the community to be able to respond with those conversations, in addition to having resources available in the event that we need to catch somebody in a dangerous situation. So that's where, again, when it comes to like safety and mitigating risks, skill building, education, that's where the community piece really comes in. And there's significant value in that, and also setting community norms and values as well, because we know that this is a multi-layered area that we have to address. We have to address it at the community level, we have to address it at the familial level, and we have to address it at the individual level. And until all those three components are really in place, it would be very, very difficult to address this on any one without the others in place. So all have a significant role and a significant place in addressing prevention and substance misuse.
You just mentioned mitigating risk factors. What do you mean by that? How do we do that? How do we do it as parents? How do we do it as a community, as professionals?
Right. So we know that there are inherent risks that exist in the community and within individual and family settings. And so it's important that we are able to identify those, because if we can start to reduce the risks that we know occur, violence, looking at abuse, looking at neglect, those are some of the big ones, suicidality, looking at some of those really big risk factors, mental unwellness and at the extent at which it impacts the family. Those are areas that we can begin to mitigate risks. And so prevention is key, and these are all preventable. So one of the things that we talk about and need to address are the adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. So looking at ACEs and understanding more about what that is, but not just the risk, but really bolstering and strengthening our protective factors, the things that we know that exist in the community that really target and enhance wellness and reduce stigma and all of those things. So that's really where we need to bolster those protective factors, those things that exist in the community. And there are very specific things that we know work. We know that schools play a huge role in addressing this issue, not just in education, but in providing quality education. It's reducing, one of the social determinants of health. So looking at all of these pieces together play a huge role in addressing these protective areas that we need to really strengthen in order to create healthy and safe communities. And so while risk factors are going to exist, I think that we sometimes give a lot of we address risk factors a lot because we do want to get to root cause, but until we really start to boost up those protective factors, those risk factors are going to continue to exist. So we're able to mitigate that a lot by bolstering a lot of the protection and the healthy and safe ways that we're able to keep our kids and communities safe.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. And if you mentioned all of the municipal alliances, I didn't even know we had quite that many. If people wanted to find them, what would they Google? What is the link? What do you have that listed on the former Jakarta website?
We do. Yes, every county has a county municipal alliance coordinator. They are able to direct anybody. So if you go to our website, which is still listed as GCADA, but will be changing soon, you are able to identify where in your county you can reach out to, and then they can direct you to the municipality that you're looking to get involved with. So it's a great way to get involved in your community. They do really good work. If you're looking for resources, they are really a wonderful resource. We've been around for 30 plus years in New Jersey doing this work. We're the only one in the nation that has a setup like this, and it's been really successful and a model for many other states. So we're really proud of the work that we do, and cannot say enough about the work that is happening in our communities.
Thank you, Rebecca. I knew that was going to come up, so I was just kind of trying to cut that off at the pass. It's a resource that I know a lot of professionals in the community are not utilizing as much as we could. So I wanted to make sure everybody could find that.
Yes.
So thank you. All right, we're going to turn to Angelo now. Angelo is from the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey. So Angelo, as we look at the fentanyl crisis, what should parents be aware of regarding common ways that their children might be introduced to an opioid? But a doctor or dentist, we know that this is sometimes an opening. What should parents do about it? And what should they say to their children about safety? How do you take the safe prescription and make it get to the fentanyl talk? How do we do that?
Well, I think there's certainly links that we can make between the two. I think that in New Jersey in particular, what we've done is we've introduced legislation that was passed about 5 years ago that required that prior to prescribing an opiate, that a physician or a dentist or a nurse practitioner has to have a conversation with the family, with the parents of children, to explain to them about the addictive quality of the drugs that are being prescribed, and also about non-opioid alternatives that might be available to them. So this law, which was passed in the state in 2017, has now been adopted in 21 other states. So it really has become a model for the country to adopt, because we think that that engagement, and I know we spoke about this a little bit earlier, has to be at every level. Has to be at the medical level, engaging with families. Certainly, we also have a very active program currently working with coaches, because we know that athletes are very likely to become injured. And as a result of that, they're more likely to become getting prescribed an opiate. So we're working very closely with coaches and athletic directors to inform them about the dangers of the potential dangers that exist and the dependency that sets in only 5 days. What we have learned through research is that it only takes 5 days of a prescribed pill for dependency to set in. And that's among adults. With children, it's even more of an issue because the brain is still developing until a child is well into their early 20s. And we know that it manipulates the way the brain functions in opiate. So there's certainly many, many concerns that come along with prescribing opiate for any reason for a child outside of extreme circumstances. Now, how does it link into fentanyl? Well, we heard before about the fact that there are many different types of individuals, young people, children, that are experimenting. They're experimenting because it may be with a group of their classmates, and they're trying something new. They're experimenting because they might have been exposed to this by a doctor in a prescribed situation, and they felt that it was safe. And that's one of the reasons why, having this conversation is important at the medical level with the families about the dangers of an opiate and the dangers of taking a prescribed medication like that. And certainly in some cases, they're finding illicit drugs because they have a drug dependency. They are certainly in a position where they need to be able to find access to other types of drugs other than an opiate that they might have been prescribed to at one point. So in this way, we believe in many ways that by stopping that group of individuals from experimenting, by stopping that group of individuals from seeking these illicit drugs, we will have an opportunity to make progress and make changes in what we're seeing now. And we think not only do we think that this is possible, but if you look at the statistics and you look at New Jersey, for example, versus many other states, we are seeing a decline in overdose deaths over the last several years. Now, obviously, the numbers are way too high, and even one is way too high. We need to make sure that everyone works collectively to eliminate this completely. However, we do see that there is movement in the right direction in New Jersey as compared to our neighbors, Pennsylvania and New York, and some of the other states in our surrounding communities. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we have been providing parents with the resources they need to become informed. We now have a situation where doctors are required to have this conversation at first prescription. And we also have programs. Rebecca has mentioned some of the programs that we launched at the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey, but all of our programs are focused on parental involvement. It started 25 years ago with our research that showed that families who had dinners together were those children were less likely to experiment. So we did is we encourage families to spend time together, to have those conversations, and they don't have to be formal conversations. They really need to be open lines of communications. Be able to identify quickly, as was mentioned earlier, if a child is sort of not sitting at the table in the same way they might have in the past, not conversing. Obviously other signs that you can see as a parent that that child is not the same child they were the day before, the week before. So that sort of is a way, we believe, to be able to really make a difference, to get parents involved. And parents, we believe, are the primary source of prevention. Now, everyone else plays a role, coaches and doctors, but certainly parents, we believe, is a central role in order to really address this issue correctly.
When do you think parents should start introducing these talks? Like Rebecca mentioned, it should start early. I'm sure you're going to say the same thing, but how do you bring that up with younger children? And what is your advice to introducing the start of that talk? Because I know that as a parent, it's very difficult to figure out when you introduce this subject.
Well, our programs actually in schools started in third grade. And what we did is we developed what we call our healthy lifestyles program, which is a third grade program, which encourages third graders to, there's a coloring book that we provide, it talks about healthy choices that they make. And it's not specifically about substance abuse, but it's about healthy choices. And at the conclusion of that, there's a contract that the third grade student signs along with their parents and a school official. And what it does is it talks about their roles, talks about the child's roles to go to a parent if they're ever approached to experiment with anything for that matter. It talks about the parent being a place where the home will be a safe place, and it'll be an open space, and it'll be a place where they'll be loved, and also a place where they can really turn to in case of any issues that take place. And it talks about the school really playing that same role, being a safe place for people to go to, whether it be a teacher, a principal, a responsible adult, a coach. So we find that that's a really great way to be able to engage all the different sort of individuals that play a role in this. And it continues on, that same message continues on throughout the years in school-based programs. So we think that's a really great place to start. And it's also we at that age, 9 or 10 years old, you find that they're very inquisitive, that they're extremely knowledgeable, that more knowledgeable than we want to believe that they are. And certainly over the years, because of the introduction of the internet, this information is becoming readily available. So we don't provide the information, someone else will.
Thank you, Angelo. I think that is one of the biggest issues that parents and schools and people that work with young people, that is one of the biggest things that no one is really certain how we start this conversation. Because even though many of us, especially people on call, we have spent many, many years trying to address and eliminate stigma as much as possible. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of stigma involved. Denise mentioned that, parents still all want to have it's not my kid, or not my child. We want to believe that our kids are kind of absorbing good things by osmosis, but not dealing with it directly. But I think that parents like of our generation, especially, are worried about this because we have carried a lot of the dare mentality and the stigma along with us, and we're kind of inadvertently passing that on to our kids. So thank you for giving us those, actual practical things that we can do with our children to get this this conversation rolling. So I'm gonna turn it over to Fred, because I understand that Fred has a lot of things to say about our anti-stigma pushes. And so I'm gonna turn the floor over to him.
So thanks to everyone here. I want to say first, everybody on this call has been doing this a long time, and this is just, it's a long journey, and everyone here has been gritty and doing this for many, many years, and trying to fight overdose for many, many years. And the game has certainly changed. And just highlighting, I appreciate you bringing up stigma. A couple things to highlight. Is that we're talking about youth, and we're talking about, unsuspecting people in some way. But I think we have to take a step back a little bit. You were talking about protective factors. Both Angelo and Rebecca were talking about protective factors, incredibly important. We should think about protective factors, knowing that everyone who dies from an overdose, or nearly everyone, is using something willingly. Right? They are taking a risk at some point. It could be a pill they didn't know was filled with fentanyl, but there is an intentional action that is happening. And so if we embrace that, and we look at the kid who's 17 who takes a pill from their friend and didn't realize it, or the person who has an overwhelming craving to avoid withdrawal, and they will do anything, and they will not be thinking of the long term. They're quite similar. The younger person is like, I want to be in the moment. I'm in that moment. And the person who's having a craving at that moment is the same thing. I don't care what's in here. And, I say to people, the only reason I'm alive today is I used heroin in the 80s and 90s and not today. There were certain things I did. And one of the things was, when I knew there was a bad batch on the street, I would use less. I would test it. I would be willing. I didn't want to die. And I had some insight into testing and thinking intentionally. And the thing about it is, my friends who died, they didn't want to die either. They just weren't testing it, because that drive was so, just if you're in a relationship and your partner gives you a pill at 17, you're not thinking about that, but there's a drive. So when we look at stigma, I think, I remember, I'll just say a couple things. The National Safety Council did something where it was a tribute to people who died of prescription drug overdoses, and they left out everybody else. It was only people who were innocent and they died of prescription drug overdoses. And eventually they changed it, and not talking about that. But as we think about it, which is, we have to approach this from a public health approach with everyone. And we have to sort of take out, I hope we can take out that perceived innocence, because stigma is driven by, perceived innocence, perceived control in overcoming something, perceived response to assistance. Are you responding to assistance? And that unpredictability and danger of what may happen. And that's why people are stigmatized. And so we just want to be mindful that when we think about this, there's a lot of willingness going on, and we should think of everybody similarly. The other thing I want to highlight is the overwhelming majority of people who are dying, are between 25 and 54. And you can even add it to 64, which is, these are people in the prime of their lives as well. And when we think about really combating the opioid overdose, we have to work from the start with young people, talking about it, making sure they're aware. And it sounds like some of the efforts are working. And we also have to meet people where they are in the moment. And there's a lot of great work with fentanyl test strips and naloxone, and I do think it's helping. But I want to bring back something that struck me in the conversation, which is really working with people to bring on more personal awareness and start to have those conversations about the sanctity of life in their own life, and thinking about intention, and being okay with people saying they're using, and how can we work and help you be more personally aware, because you're worth it, whether you're using, you're not using, or whatever it might be. So one of the things we're working on is essentially a mindful use program, which is really focused. So when I was at the partnership, we had a program called Help and Hope for Parents, and wherever someone was on the continuum, parents would get text messages, whether your child was in an MOUD program, whether your child was, not using it all, early use, struggling, didn't matter where you are. We built it, and we made it easy. And that's part of the goal, is when you're not in your own head with fentanyl, is you can't think rationally. So how do we build personal awareness in people who are using? That's not just about safety and precautions, which are incredibly important. Having naloxone, all of that is part of personal knowledge, but being aware of what you're using, when you're using it, taking a 10-second break before you use, and starting to really build this in programs that's not just about naloxone and fentanyl test strips, right? Like how do we think about this with fentanyl? The other is sort of like, when we think about the tools and resources, is everyone knows I'm a big tech, or on the call at least, I'm very interested in technology. And so how do we make it very easy for people to engage? I'm a big fan of text messaging because it's ubiquitous. There's no digital divide. There's no racial and ethnic divide, but it also is very easy for people. It gives people something in the moment, and it could be empowering. It doesn't have to be a naloxone. It doesn't have to be anything. There's amazing apps, as you all know, Never Use Alone, Brave, that people can start to use, and we should start to think about that. And then the last thing I'd say is, in terms of like, as we're thinking about using intentionally, and let's not forget that stimulant users are the fastest growing group of people who are overdosing. And it's very easy not to talk about it because it doesn't almost make sense. You're like, what? But if you look at stimulant use, it's even without opioids, it's going up. But then most stimulants are now having fentanyl or other opioids, synthetic opioids in them. And so as we think about our approach, thinking about it very holistically, of like, we have to approach this full on, not just in terms of our young people, but across the continuum. I don't know if that made any sense. I didn't have a question prepared, but
Thank you for doing that tie-in to prevention and harm reduction, because we traditionally look at these in silos, and it's absolutely we need to stop doing that. Like, prevention is more than, we don't want kids to use drugs. Prevention, like, yes, we can all hope that, but like, all of us on the call, most people of any age really, like, we all have experience with experimentation. We know that our kids might, but of course we worry because experimentation is not like it was back when we were in high school. This is a very different illicit drug market, and it's why we're so worried about it. So talking about, we have to down this morality idea of like, there's certain people that are good and there are certain people that are less good, and like, substance use is just something that always happens. Like, it's just going to happen. Different substances, it's not always illicit, but this is a substance saturated society. There's alcohol, there's caffeine, there's nicotine. And just realizing that this is something that, is normal until it's not, and safer ways for people to stay alive. That is prevention, and that is harm reduction. So thank you for doing that tie-in. I'm going to turn it to Tanya, because this is like the fastest hour, 50 minutes that we've ever done. Tanya, I know that when Fred was talking about that idea of like the innocent versus the less innocent, I know that this is something that is very important to you. Those of us that know you, and especially those of us on the call that are close to you, we know that your son Rory struggled with substance use for many, many years before, unfortunately, he also died, like a lot of the people that we're talking about on this call. So what message, just based on your own personal experience with Rory and what happened, what do you want to talk about when it comes to fentanyl?
So it's a real issue that Fred brought up about how this divide. And yet we spent many, many years, especially NCAAR, which was NCAD, when we originally got involved. Heather and I have been doing this for 11 years together. It was stigma was a huge part of what we did. And, we came a long way, I think, in talking about substance use and talking about recovery and families' involvement. And then all of a sudden, just when we're starting to see some great things happening and we got peers in the workforce and, some really positive things, all of a sudden we have this discussion about, overdose versus poisoning. So Denise and I actually spoke at the DEA in Washington, D.C., and we talked about this. The language is so important, and what's happened and I think it's, people didn't plan for this to happen. I mean, nobody wants to, everyone's trying to protect their loved one, right? And so for some people, who didn't know that there was, substance use being happening, or that, maybe it was one pill, right? For them, being the same as someone like my son, who used for 14 years before he lost his battle with substances, they didn't want to be the same. They don't want to be considered the same, but it is the same. And I think what's happened is, and I've talked to many families that I've known for many years who have lost children, all of a sudden we're back to the stigma. All of a sudden we're back to the blame. It was their fault. And even before all of this happened, families would talk about going to grief support groups and being told, well, your child's different because you should have known they were going to die because they were using substances. We're back to that, right? We've already had to find like grief in different areas because of people stigmatizing. Now there's this separation. Your child may have lost, like my son had fentanyl in his system. He actually stopped using opioids and he was using stimulants. And he had fentanyl and xylazine in his system when he passed away. So, and honestly, I talked to him about that. And, a lot of people who are using just don't want to believe that it's in stimulants as well. And I've been hearing from people, well, in our county, we don't have a problem with opiates anymore. It's stimulants. They're still overdosing. I'm telling you, they're overdosing because of fentanyl. There's opioids in everything. There's fentanyl in everything. In my county, in Cape May County, 100% of the bags that have been tested for opioids have fentanyl. 100%. And yet people will tell me we don't have an issue. And the other thing is while we're talking about all of this, and we've really wanted to get this message out about fentanyl, because what I'm finding out is that people are unaware of the fentanyl issue. We're in our group, what we do, we are all thinking that we're getting that word out, but I've talked to people who have no clue, which was shocking to me that we're not reaching people. So it has to be a group effort, which is one of the reasons that we brought all of us together, because we come from different areas. We didn't want to silo this education. Right? We're tired of the silos. We want to bring everyone together so that we have a bigger reach. I think it's so important to be able to have a joint message. And that message needs that we stop talking about whose fault it is, who's innocent, who was at risk. Let's just talk about the underlying issue. Let's talk about how we educate, how we keep people from harm. And harm reduction it has become a huge issue too. And Fred and I talked about this a little bit. There's so much fear about that, that phrase harm reduction and what that means. All that means is we're keeping people from harm. Let's stop worrying about, does that mean that we need needle syringe access? It's everything. It's everything. And that includes education, and that includes the communication like Denise is working on, and the partnership worked on for years is that family communication. It's not just for youth. It's communication for everyone, and when it comes to education too, one of the things we're really missing is physical health care. I'm off my questions probably, right? Physical, what I found is that, physicians, hospitals don't know how to treat fentanyl withdrawal symptoms. They don't know how to treat someone who's in pain, who's on fentanyl. And what's happening is people are not being treated in hospitals. Even police departments have told me, we can't trust that a hospital is going to take care of somebody that we bring there. That's frightening when a police department has more compassion for someone than healthcare. We have to think about that, and we have to start demanding that everyone gets educated. This is a crisis. Everyone needs to be educated, including physicians.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the that we really have seen the stigma grow again, especially in medical facilities, since fentanyl and stimulant use especially has risen. It seems like we were making a little bit of headway with what people termed the opiate crisis, and then this came along, and now it seems like in a lot of cases we are back at square one. So we know that, harm reduction is something that is kind of ubiquitous to all of us working in the field, but people have very different ideas of what that means. What have you seen surrounding harm reduction, like some of the fears and some of the things that are associated with it?
I think there's extreme on both sides, right? And I think that's where the problem is. I think NCAAR's always been right down the middle, right? I mean, we are down the middle. But when when you're talking prevention and we're talking about open air use, that's just way too far for someone, even for us to go a little bit. Open air use is that's just a whole different subject. But that's the thing, is there's this extreme on either side. And we really need to understand that we've got to kind of meet in the middle to reach all audiences, but we also have to understand that everyone's at different levels too. And some extreme things need to happen, need to be available for some people. That doesn't mean that we're going to have a children's program and talk about syringes. And that's what the fear is. And that's just not the way it goes. So I think we need to get past this idea that harm reduction is a bad thing to talk about, and it means that you want people to use. That's not what it's about. We want people to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
And but we should all be doing that. And honestly, I'm disappointed that it's National Fentanyl Awareness Day, and I don't know of any events in the entire state but this. And that's upsetting to me. I mean, we know there is a statewide National Fentanyl Poisoning Day in June, so we'll we'll recognize that as well. But here we are, and with everyone, all these deaths with fentanyl, and we're not even recognizing it. We're not doing something statewide on this day. That's sad, and that is where the silos are.
Yeah, I know that in one of our publicity, like we're doing this today. Tanya had mentioned she and I are both pretty well known for not liking talking about any individual substance, because we feel like it kind of misses the forest for the trees. And this is about all of the underlying problems that may eventually lead to using substances. And we know from experience that when we just talk about one particular substance, it's like playing whack-a-mole, because like as soon as we get one down, another one's going to pop up. But we are finding, I think everybody on this call is finding, that like we all know this stuff, but like the general public is still not aware. And we are realizing that people who just occasionally use substances that have no problems with them whatsoever, they use them recreationally, they are not aware of the dangers of fentanyl. And they are not aware that the vast majority of the pills on the street are pressed fentanyl. But I think that a webinar like this, where everybody's talking about the collaborative efforts, because I know that as we work in our day to day, it gets difficult and we get upset with different silos. But I think if we all just remember that we all have different areas of specialties, but our goal is all exactly the same thing, no matter which silo or which end of it we are in. And that's for people to not lose more people. Like, Angelo mentioned, we are bucking the national trend in New Jersey with our overall numbers going down. But unfortunately, when you break it down by population, the numbers for our Latino and people of color, like those numbers are still climbing up. So we know that we have a lot of work to do to get messages out there to different communities and to people that are not as plugged into it as we are. And I implore everybody to, take this collaborative effort to heart, because it's the only way we're going to get this done.
I did, so we're out of time, but I did want to mention Ellen had asked a question, and for some reason, our Q&A is not working very well. Ellen, just so you know, you're asking about what stimulants have had fentanyl in it. Everything. Cocaine, methamphetamine, everything. So nothing is safe. And so we all have to understand that nothing is safe. And even somebody, and I tell you that my son someone trusted that he would buy from, even they don't know what's in things. So I think, it's important for everyone to understand. And the other thing that we didn't talk about, which is in the video, I think, is that fentanyl test strips, like to test a pill, if you've got 10 pills and you test one and it's good, doesn't mean the rest aren't good. And that's why when kids buy together and one person lives and 9 pass away, that's what happens. And so that's important too, that as we're talking about harm reduction, we understand that testing is, I think we have to talk about why not, to what the danger is, and try to convince people that not to do a pill that they find or they buy online or wherever it is. But it's very hard to keep people safe, and that's that's our priority. We're like 1 minute after. Do you want to anyone have any comments they want to make before we end? Any questions, you can send us an email. You'll get a copy of the video of the whole webinar. Fred, you look like you're moving, and so does Denise. No? Okay.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to say anything, but I am going to, one of the things that strikes me about harm reduction is I do feel the field from prevention to early intervention has moved in a way. Strong for Charlie's harm reduction, right? It's a targeted harm reduction program. That's all it is. The new drug talk is harm reduction, safety first Stanford protocol. And what it is that awareness, right? And I just really appreciate, what Heather, you're saying in terms of we have to attack this from so many different levels, and we have to hyper personalize this to people because people are coming at it from so many different ways. And I'm just grateful to be a part of this group and thinking about and part of this shift, because I personally do think it's shifting. There's a big difference from 10 years ago.
There's a question in the chat that I want to address. This ties into the myths that we did not get to. But somebody asked about, does marijuana or cannabis, is that in with all of these other drugs that may have fentanyl in it? Studies up to this point have shown that if there is fentanyl in the marijuana or the cannabis products, and we have to assume, because if it's cut in the same area, we have to assume that it's in there. But when you put direct flame, which you have to do to smoke a cannabis product, that is too high of a temperature for the fentanyl to have an effect. So it will burn the fentanyl. So people that are saying I overdosed just using marijuana or cannabis, that is usually not the case. So that
so important, Heather. Yeah, to drop that back.
So we need to know that that is not part of it, though everything else is. Cocaine, meth, all pills. The other myth that I really want to address is you cannot overdose by touching fentanyl. So if you have somebody in your vicinity that has fentanyl, please do not worry about if it gets on your skin, you're going to overdose and be gone. We do know that if you have open cuts, open wounds, if you ingest it through mucous membranes, that does up your chances. You will definitely be fentanyl exposed. But remember, an overdose has very distinctive markers, okay? So if you look up the signs of overdose, if you are upright going, I touched fentanyl, you are not overdosing, you have just been exposed to it. That being said, we do recommend that everybody in this day and age have some kind of naloxone in the vicinity, whether it's for you, a loved one, or just somebody on the street. We are advocating to have it put in AED boxes. There are lots of other ways to get your hands on it at no cost to you. But those are two things that I did want to address. So thank you, Rhonda, for bringing up the marijuana question in the chat.
And Heather, if we have a call to action today, I mean, it's those sensationalized stories. And listen, we work with, the labs, we work at the DEA. There's not one reported case, right? doesn't mean we're going to go out there and say, hey, smoke a bunch of marijuana, right? That's not the purpose of this. But I mean, I think we all have a call to action here, but those that us on this call is like, share the messaging that Heather just said, right? It's when we shut down the sensationalism and that we get to the core of what's happening here that we can do a better job. Because I think we all know. And another reason why that's so important too is like, if you look at the DFC funding state to state to state to state, there is nothing for fentanyl. No funds for fentanyl. It is vaping and alcohol. I'm not saying they're not issues, but that's another thing. So go to your DFCs and say, can we have just a small percentage, please, to educate our community?
Well,
So
we do have an update on legislation that was put in place. The same person that asked for the legislation on the fentanyl poisoning day also asked for legislation to educate in the schools, and the legislators are refusing to have it heard in committee. And there's our problem right there, right? Because they've already committed to the 5-year
Yep.
curriculum, and they're not willing to add something that is life-threatening like this. And so, those are the kind of things. Call your legislators, demand that we get education, not just for fentanyl though, for all illicit substances. Like when we have an issue with a substance that we're seeing a high rate of overdoses or deaths, we should be talking to our schools about that, to our children about that. And so call your legislator, and say, like, what's going on? We heard this legislation. Why isn't it going through? Why are we not doing this in our schools? It's really important.
I know we're over. I saw something in the chat about fentanyl poisoning versus overdose, and I know a lot of people have thought about this, and certainly I have too. And I didn't want to indicate. I actually feel like it doesn't matter. I think calling something fentanyl poisoning for yourself or for many other people is they're unaware that there's fentanyl and that they are poisoned. I agree with that. I also agree with overdose. Or just a drug death, whatever the wording is, as long as we are all on the same page that a life is a life. And I understand if being an unaware user makes sense. So some people are very much against it. I personally am not, but the larger question is, how do we think of the person who did overdose? How do we think of the person that was intentional or whatever it might be? So I just wanted to throw that out because it's such an important topic, and thank you for bringing it up. And I'm so sorry for your loss, Renat.
I think if we could just say, like I always say, my son died from a substance related death.
Yeah.
And it places no blame, and it doesn't, no one knows. And, technically it was a heart issue caused by substances, right? But fentanyl was in his system and definitely had a part in that, and xylazine. So I think as long as, like you said, as long as we're looking at the individual and, it's not placing blame, we're not, looking at one as innocent and the other as, someone who deserved it, or, it was going to happen because of what they were doing. I think that's fine. I just think we have to make sure that we're looking at it that way.
And I think we all need to remember the phrase that every overdose death is a policy failure. Like this is just not necessary. We can be doing things very differently, but it does take this village and the village of viewers. Thank you for those of you that are hanging in after time with us. It takes all of us to address this.
Policy is a great way to end this conversation.
All right. So I want to say thank you to our viewers. Thank you to our panelists, especially. You're all amazing. Keep doing this amazing work, and please keep collaborating with everybody that's here, because it is going to take all of us to be able to make a dent in what we are all working towards. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.